A very good afternoon to one and all. My name is Dr. Vishalli, and I'm working as an assistant professor in the Department of B.Sc Computer Science at IIMT College of Science and Technology, Greater Noida. The topic of today's presentation is Introduction to Carbon Nanotube. So let us begin with this session. So in today's session, we are going to discuss about the carbon nanotubes. What are basically the carbon nanotubes? What are its various types? What are the different methods with which we can synthesize the carbon nanotubes? What are the properties and applications of the carbon nanotubes? So first of all, the basic introduction about the carbon nanotubes. So as a name suggests, these are the tubes which are nanotubes, meaning the dimensions are of the order of the nanometers. So carbon nanotubes falls in the category of the nanomaterials. So all the materials which have the dimensions of the order of 10 raised to the power minus 9 meter, they all are said to be the nanomaterial. So carbon nanotube is also one of the nanomaterial. It was first discovered by Ijima and his co-workers in 1991. So why these are now called as a nanomaterial? Because the diameter of this tube, it is a hollow tube-like structure, and the diameter of this tube is of the order of the nanometers, and length of this tube, it varies from a few nanometers to microns. Due to this factor, they have a large aspect ratio, that is length to diameter ratio of carbon nanotubes is very large. Now next, how the CNTs are formed, what is the structure of the CNT? So CNT or carbon nanotube, it is configurationally equal to a two-dimensional graphene sheet which is rolled into a tube. This is clearly shown in this diagram. Here you can see that this is a graphene sheet. Now what is a graphene sheet? Graphene sheet is basically one atom thick layer of a graphite. Graphite, that is one of the allotropes of the carbon. So it is one atom thick sheet or layer of the graphite, which is called as a graphene. It's a two-dimensional. Whenever we are rolling this sheet in any direction, for example, as shown in this diagram number 2, we are basically rolling this sheet and we are getting this type of the structure. It's a hollow cylindrical-like structure. So this type of structure is basically called as a CNT, or we basically call it as a carbon nanotube. Now this sheet, it is composed of entirely, the bonding in this sheet is entirely of sp2 type. So we can say that in carbon nanotubes also the entire bonding is of sp2 bonds, which is similar to that of the graphite. Due to this bonding structure, that is due to this sp2 bonding structure, it is responsible for the unique strength and the property of the carbon nanotubes. Moving forward, types of carbon nanotubes. Basically, we can categorize carbon nanotubes into two types. One is a single wall carbon nanotubes and another is a multi-walled carbon nanotube. So single wall carbon nanotube, first of all, talking about single wall carbon nanotubes, the structure of single wall carbon nanotubes can be conceptualized, so we can understand it by that we are wrapping a one atom thick layer of the graphene, as I have shown in the previous diagram, that we are basically rolling a one atom thick layer of the graphene into a hollow cylinder. So the cylinder which is formed is called as a single wall carbon nanotube. So what is a single wall carbon nanotube? It is formed by wrapping a one atom thick layer of the graphite called graphene into a seamless cylinder. So this is a structure which is shown in the diagram 1. This is a structure of the single wall carbon nanotube. Second category is multi-walled carbon nanotubes. Now, what are multi-walled? As a name says, more than one walls. If we have a nanotube configuration with more than one wall, that is called as a multi-walled carbon nanotube. So, what are multi-walled carbon nanotubes? These are basically the coaxial assembly of the cylinders of the single-walled CNTs. You can see in this diagram number 2 that we have this single-wall carbon nanotubes. Around that, we have another tube, and then we have another tube, and so on. So this type of the assembly, this type of the coaxial assembly of the single wall carbon nanotubes is basically called as a multi-walled carbon nanotubes. Further, in order to describe the structure of the multi-walled carbon nanotubes, we basically discuss the two models. We have basically the two models. That is, one is a Russian doll model and another is called as the parchment model. So what is there in the Russian doll model? In the Russian doll model, the sheet of the graphene are basically arranged in the concentric cylinders. These are in the form of the concentric cylinders in the Russian doll model. You can imagine it like we have a small cylinder of the single wall CNT. Surrounding that, we have a single wall CNT of comparatively large diameter, and then we have another CNT which is of some larger diameter, and so on. So this type of model is called as a Russian doll model. Whereas in the parchment model, is like the arrangement in which the single sheet of graphene is rolled around itself. It is rolled around itself to form a rolled newspaper like structure, or the roll of a parchment. So that is why it is called as a parchment model. So we have now understood that in case of the multi-wall carbon nanotubes, we have two models. That is a Russian doll model, in which we have the graphene sheet which is rolled in the form of the concentric cylinders, and in the parchment model, the graphene sheet is rolled around itself to form a rolled newspaper like structure. So that is called as a parchment model. Now, next, on the basis of chirality, or on the basis of the chiral indices and chiral angles, single wall CNTs can also be further divided into three categories. We can further divide the single wall carbon nanotubes into the three categories, that is armchair, zigzag, and chiral nanotubes. Now, what do we understand by when we say that we are differentiating it on the basis of the chiral indices or chiral angle? To understand this, let us consider this sheet. This is a sheet of the graphene. And on the basis of that, how we are rolling this sheet, in which direction we are basically rolling this sheet, this category is formed on that basis, that how we are rolling the graphene sheet. So on the basis, we can define it in the term, we can categorize them as armchair, zigzag, or chiral nanotubes. For example, consider this sheet. These are the coordinates. This is a single graphene sheet, the honeycomb network. On the these are N and M indices, and on N side it is a column number, and M, let us assume that this is a row number. So these are the coordinates of all these atoms or all these points. So whenever we are rolling it, the sheet like with 0, 0, we are coinciding this point. This point is being coincided, the 0, 0 and 11, 0. In this case, one of the chiral index, one of the coordinate that is equal, the one of the coordinate that is 0. So this sheet is formed, this graphene sheet is formed when we are basically coinciding these 2 points, 0, 0 and 11, 0. In this configuration, either of the coordinate, one of the coordinate is 0 and the angle is also 0 degree. This type of the tube which will be formed as a result of the wrapping of this graphene sheet, this will be called as the zigzag, because you can see here in diagram number 2, the structure here formed is, the cross section here formed is a zigzag type. So that is why this is called as a zigzag nanotube, or we can say that this is zigzag configuration. So what we are doing, we are basically what is being done, it is formed when either of the indices, either of the coordinate is 0 and the chiral angle is 0. The nanotube which is formed by this method, that is called as a zigzag nanotube. Second category is an armchair nanotube. So to understand the armchair nanotube, let us assume that this is a graphene sheet, and now we are rolling, or we are wrapping the sheet in a way that this coordinate 7, 7, it is coinciding with this point 0, 0. So in this way, we can say that in this case, all the indices, the N and M values, they are equal to each other, and the chiral angle is 30 degrees. So we are now rolling or wrapping the sheet in this direction. We are rolling the sheet in this direction. So in this way, the carbon nanotubes which are formed, those are called as an armchair, because you can see in this diagram number 1, it is forming a chair-like configuration. If we follow these lines, then this is a chair type configuration is formed. That is why this is called as an armchair. So In zigzag nanotubes, either of these are formed when n or m is 0 and the chiral angle is 0 degree. Armchairs are formed when n is equal to m and the chiral angle is 30 degree. Now, apart from these two configuration, there are other ways also in which we can wrap or we can roll a graphene sheet. So all the other nanotube configuration, all the other nanotubes with chiral angles which are lying between 0 to 30 degree, they will be categorized into a chiral nanotube, right? So we have basically three types of single wall carbon nanotubes depending upon how the graphene sheet is rolled. One is the armchair, second is a zigzag, and third is category is the chiral nanotubes. So this is also one of the way in which we can categorize a single wall carbon nanotubes. Moving on, next are the methods of the synthesis of CNTs. So how can we obtain the CNTs in lab? How we can grow the CNTs in lab? So mainly there are three main techniques which are used. First is the arc discharge, second is laser ablation, third is the chemical vapor deposition. So we will discuss them one by one. The first method is the arc discharge method. This is one of the very basic method to obtain the carbon nanotube. So what's there in the arc discharge method? The schematic diagram of the arc discharge apparatus, it is shown in this, it's shown in here. It is shown in here. So what we have basically two carbon rods. We can see here we have one graphite anode and cathode. So we have basically two carbon rods which are placed end to end, and the distance between these rods, it is of the order of approximately 1 mm. There is very small gap between the two carbon rods, and these carbon rods are further enclosed inside a enclosure which is filled with the inert gas that can be helium or argon, and the pressure is of the order of 50 to 700 millibar. So we have two carbon rods which are placed end to end with a gap of 1 mm, and they are placed in an atmosphere of the inert gas with the low pressure. Now, when a DC current of 50 to 100 amperes are driven by approximately 25 volts, it will create a high temperature discharge between the electrodes. Whenever we are passing this current, DC current of 50 to 100 ampere in through this setup, then a high temperature discharge is being created between these two electrodes, between these two carbon rods. And due to this discharge vaporizes one of the carbon rods, and we are in this process, we are getting the carbon nanotubes. It will form a small rod shaped structure, carbon nanotube like structure on the other rod. So after we are done with this discharge part, then we will collect all the soot, and then we will purify it and will extract basically the carbon nanotubes out of that soot which is collected on the other rod. These are the 10 images of the single wall carbon nanotubes and the multi-wall carbon nanotubes which are obtained from the arc discharge method. So this is basically the methodology of this arc discharge process, in which we are placing two carbon rods, and a high temperature discharge is being created between the two electrodes, and in this process the carbon nanotubes are basically generated. Talking about the second method, that is called as a laser ablation method. It was developed by Dr. Richard Smalley and the co-workers at Rice University in 1995. So let's see what is there in this method. So in laser ablation method, we have a graphite target. You can see here we have this graphite target, and it is placed under very high temperature. It is placed inside this furnace. The temperature of this furnace is 1200 degrees Celsius, and in the inert atmosphere of helium or argon gas at the pressure of 500 torr. So in this method, what we will do, we have a high power laser beam which is used to vaporize this graphite target. So we can say in laser ablation method, we have a high power laser beam which is used to vaporize this graphite target under high temperature and under inert atmosphere, in inert atmospheric conditions. Now what will happen, that This as this laser will ablate this target, this material, then the carbon nanotubes are grown in this process. As this portion is flown by the inert gases are passing through it. So this inert gas, the inert gas will move the carbon nanotubes or carbon material which is generated to this copper collector. So nanotubes which are developed on the cooler surface of the reactors, as a vaporized carbon condenses. As it will condense, we will get the carbon nanotubes on this copper collector. From this we can collect and we can further identify, we can further purify, and we will get the carbon nanotubes as a result. So this is a laser ablation method in which we use a high power laser. We use a graphite target and the inert gas in the inert gas atmosphere, and the CNTs which are grown inside this chamber, they are then flown away by those inert gases and they are collected here at the copper collector. From there we can extract those nanotubes. This is a schematic diagram of the laser ablation process. The third and the mostly used method to grow the carbon nanotubes, to synthesize the carbon nanotubes, that is a chemical vapor deposition. This is, we can also say that it is a commercial method for the production of carbon nanotubes. So let's see what is there in this method. So in this method, this is a schematic diagram of the chemical vapor deposition setup. In this method, we are using the hydrocarbon vapor, that is methane, carbon monoxide, and acetylene, etc. These are basically passed through this furnace. This furnace is maintained at a very high temperature. And inside this furnace, we have a substrate which is coated with the catalyst material. And whenever the hydrocarbon vapors are passed through this furnace in which the substrate coated with the catalyst material is placed at high temperature, these hydrocarbon will decompose. So they will decompose inside this furnace. So after the decomposition of the hydrocarbon, the carbon molecules which will be generated, they will diffuse toward the substrate, and substrate is already coated with the catalyst material. So whenever the carbon molecule will diffuse toward the substrate, they will bind with the catalyst. So after decomposition of hydrocarbons, the carbon molecule diffuse toward the substrate where they will bind with the catalyst. So in this way, the nanotubes are grown. So CNTs are grown over the catalyst and then they are collected after cooling the system to the room temperature. So CNTs are grown over the catalyst which are with which the substrate material is coated with, and then we can separate those CNTs from those catalyst on which they are grown. So this is the briefing about the chemical vapor deposition method. So now we are done with the three synthesis method, that is the arc discharge method, laser ablation method, and the chemical vapor deposition method. Depending upon this, on the conditions under which we can vary all those conditions. Depending upon those conditions, we can obtain the variety of nanotubes. For example, if we want single wall carbon nanotubes, or we want the more yield of the multi-wall carbon nanotubes. So the conditions can be controlled and we can get the desired carbon nanotubes out of that process. Next, the properties of the carbon nanotubes. Carbon nanotubes, these are the highly versatile carbon nanomaterials, and they possess a wide range of the properties. So they have many applications in almost every field: nanotechnology, material science, electronics, in medicines, and all the fields. We have found many applications of the CNTs. So here are some important properties of carbon nanotubes. Carbon nanotubes exhibit the extraordinary mechanical property. They are incredibly strong with the tensile strength, which is much greater than that of the steel. Second, electrical conductivity. Also, CNTs or carbon nanotubes are the excellent conductors of the electricity. And particularly as we have categorized them in different, depending upon the chirality, we can basically further divide them in the categories like metallic and the semiconducting carbon nanotubes. So depending upon the application, we can basically utilize those carbon nanotubes. So these are excellent conductors of the electricity, and they have the remarkable electrical properties, so which make them the potential candidates for high performance electronics and the conductive additives in the composites. Third is a thermal conductivity. Also, CNTs have excellent thermal conductivity, and which makes them useful for the thermal management applications. Biocompatibility. Some of the carbon nanotubes, although the toxicity issues are always related and research is going on regarding the applications of the carbon nanotubes, it has been found that some type of the carbon nanotubes, they have shown the potential for the biocompatibility. So due to this property, due to this compatibility, they have found application in various fields such as drug delivery and tissue engineering. Also, we have mentioned it earlier also in the first slide that they have a very large length to diameter ratio. The aspect ratio is very high, which means that they are beneficial for reinforcing composite material, and we can create strong and lightweight structure as a result of this property. And basically, this property is useful in the applications of aerospace. Next are the optical properties. CNTs exhibit interesting optical properties, and they have found applications in sensors and imaging. It is important to note that the properties of carbon nanotubes, they can vary depending upon their structure, synthesis method, and functionalization. So researchers are continuing to explore different ways to harness their properties for the wide range of applications. These are some of the important application, or we can say that these are some proposed application here where we can on the basis of the property of the carbon nanotubes, they can be used in these applications. First of all, we have nano composite, as we have also mentioned in the properties that they have the excellent mechanical property. So CNTs are used to reinforce various materials such as polymer, ceramics, and metals. These composites, which are formed as a result, are with the improved mechanical properties, so that they can find applications in various fields such as in aerospace and automotives. Second, as I have told that carbon nanotubes have excellent electrical conductivity. So they have also found the applications in electronics and semiconductors. So CNTs can be used as conductive elements in electronic components such as transistors, sensors, and interconnects. Next, the CNTs are also used as an energy storage device. CNTs are being explored for the application in batteries and superconductors, supercapacitors, sorry. Their high surface area and electrical conductivity can lead to the improved energy storage capacity. Also, CNTs-based sensors are highly sensitive to various gases and chemicals, so they can be used in gas sensors or biosensors, and for environmental monitoring devices. Next application is a drug delivery, that I have also already mentioned that some of the CNTs are biocompatible, and that's why those CNTs can serve as a carrier for the drug delivery system. They can be functionalized to encapsulate the and transport the drugs in the specific sites within the body. CNTs can also be used to create the ultra small, as the dimensions are very small and they have very good conductivity. So they can be used to create the ultra small electromechanical devices such as nanoscale resonators, switches, and sensors. These are called as a nano electromagnetical systems. Medical CNTs have also found use in medical devices. They are used in the development of the medical devices and materials such as prosthetic, tissue engineering scaffolds, and medical imaging agents. Next are CNTs are used in various types of coatings, which includes anti-corrosion coating and super hydrophobic coating. CNTs have also found application in textiles, so they can be incorporated into the fabrics to enhance their mechanical and conductive property, which make them useful for the application in smart textiles and wearable technologies. So these are some of the, we can say that proposed applications or important applications where we can use the CNTs based upon their properties. So these are the concluding remarks about the CNT. The versatility of the carbon nanotubes or CNTs and ongoing research in this field continue to expand their potential application across various industries. However, it is important to note that large-scale production and cost effectiveness of CNTs remain challenges that needs to be addressed for some applications to become commercially viable. So CNTs, they are very important, very versatile material, which we can use in the different applications. And we have so many properties which are favorable, and various applications are there. But apart from that, along with those good applications and properties, there are also some challenges which need to be addressed regarding the CNTs, such as the largest scale production of the CNTs are required, and the cost effectiveness of these are very, the CNTs are of very high price, and production rate is not so large. So if we want to use in a large number of application, then we require the ample amount of CNTs. So the scale production, the large scale production and cost effectiveness of the CNTs need to be improved if we want to use them in the commercial applications. So these are the references. So I hope you have understood today's lecture. So in today's lecture, we have studied basically about the carbon nanotubes. What are the different types of carbon nanotubes? What are the various synthesis method? And what are the properties and applications of carbon nanotubes? So that's all for the today's session. Thank you all.